So who's seen Rogue One so far? About 50% more than the last service. That's good. Who's seen Star Wars but not Rogue One? Yeah, there we go. That fills it in a little bit, so you can probably track with what we're going to talk about today. But I really need a volunteer. I was thinking Abby. Do you have a pen? Okay, so take a piece of paper. You can use the notebook in the pew, and you're gonna just mark a little tick for every time the word rogue is used today. It'll be interesting to see how many times it's used. It's gonna be a lot. Anyways, in this introduction, I was reading the kind of caption of what Rogue One is all about. I find it very interesting. In a time of conflict, a group of unlikely heroes band together on a mission to steal the plans to the Death Star, the Empire's ultimate weapon of destruction. This key event in the Star Wars timeline brings together ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things, and in doing so become part of something greater than themselves. As the shadows of the Empire loom ever larger across the galaxy, so do deeply troubling rumors. The rebellion has learned of a sinister imperial plot to bring entire worlds to their knees. Deep in Empire-dominated space, a machine of unimaginable destructive power is nearing completion, a weapon too terrifying to contemplate, and a threat that may be too big to overcome. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read that, I kind of think, hey, this is kind of happening right now, isn't it? There's an imperial empire out to bring us to our knees, and it feels like there's so much against us and a good way of life. And it takes, ordinary people to do extraordinary things. So that's what we're talking about today, and the key word for today is rogue. And I don't mean rogue by the dictionary definition, because that would be like, kind of losing your mind and going out and doing all kinds of illegal things, knocking over drugstores and stuff like that, gas stations. But I think our culture has kind of developed the word rogue to be kind of positive. To say when the forces that are working against us, the imperial empire, we need some rogue rebellion to do what's right. Rogue kind of becomes about doing right, having hope, making good changes. Sarah Palin went rogue. Now, she didn't go and, rob any stores in her going rogue approach. She just said, I'm not going to listen to my campaign managers anymore. That was her version of going rogue. And I don't think it worked out that well, but anyways. But, it takes ordinary people. This is Noam Chomsky. He has a documentary on Netflix called A Requiem for the American Dream. And in it, he's talking about the economic difficulty that we live in today and the problems that just keep widening the gap of economics. And he actually says at the end of it, what matters is the countless small deeds of unknown people who lay the basis for the significant events that enter history. They're the ones who have done things in the past, and they're the ones that are going to do things in the future. The countless deeds of unknown people. Rogue.
weapon with a simple weapon.
If my father built this thing, we need to find him.
All right. How many do I need?
They are requesting a call sign.
It's, Rogue. Rogue One.
The power that we are dealing with here is immeasurable.
If the Empire has this kind of power, what chance do we have?
We have hope. Rebellions are built on hope.
Okay, I got the droid. Yeah! I got the sassy droid, in case you haven't seen it yet. That droid has very little filter. Come on, kids, come on up. Come on up. Hi. Did you make it all the way to midnight? No. She did? I can sort of tell a little bit. You can see it right around here. You did? Valentine did? Who else? Who else made it to midnight? While we're waiting for everybody to come up, who else made it to midnight? You made it to midnight? Yeah! She did!
He's been going rogue since last.
You're being... Oh. Okay, so I am super excited today because this is the second Sunday in a row that I've been able to wear a Star Wars themed situation, right? Last week, in case you weren't here, I had this fantastic Darth Vader sweater, Christmas sweater on. It was very festive. And today, knowing what Will was going to preach about, I got to wear this shirt. And I picked this shirt out of the many Star Wars shirts I have for a reason. Because when I saw this movie, I thought, oh, this is kind of a good example of the absolute weirdness of Community. So from far away, what is the shirt? Who's on this shirt? R2-D2. Everybody see? R2-D2? So now here's the neat thing about this shirt is that when you get real close to it, R2-D2 is made up of a bunch of different pictures. Right? And so not every one of these pictures are of the people we root for. A lot of them are. There's Han, and there's Leia, and there's Luke. Oh my God, I almost forgot his name. There's Luke, you know, and there's fighting, and there's some celebrations, and there's Darth Vader, and there's Jabba the Hutt, and there's some raiders down here, and some unhappy moments. And this particular shirt reminded me a lot of how weird Community is. Because I know we think we get together and we unite around a common idea, right? And for us here, that is reflecting God's love into the world with our lives, with everything that we do. And so we come together. But I'm here to tell you that there are people in this room who disagree with one another strongly disagree with one another. But here's what this shirt reminds me, is that Community is built of everything. It's not just the good guys or the people we think are bad guys. Everybody in this story and in the movie and in this church has a part to play in the greater story. And nobody's part is less important than someone else's part. Even you, small people who are told when to do stuff and eat your vegetables and make your bed and clean your room and go to school, you still have an important part to play. And so when we come together, it's important to remember that what we're doing here is much more than worshiping together on a Sunday. It's much more than hanging out for chili. It's much more than having a fantastically delicious latte. Thank you, sir. It's much more than that. There's a bigger picture, and we're all working towards it. So let's pray before we go back to our families for family worship, Loving God, Thank you for the reminders that everyone has a part to play in the bigger picture of your story. Amen.
Please stand.
God of our lives, through all the circling years, we trust in you. In all the past, through all our hopes and fears, your hand we view. With each new day, when morning lifts the veil, we own your mercies, Lord, which never fail. God of the past, our times are in your hand, with us abide. Lead us by faith to hope's true promised land, be now our guide. With you to bless, the darkness shines as light, and faith's fair vision changes into sight. God of the coming years, through paths unknown, we follow you. When we are strong, Lord, leave us not alone, our faith renew. Be now for us in life our daily bread, our heart's true hope, when all our years have sped.
Please be seated. From the book of Acts. That day a severe persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout the countryside of Judea and Samaria. Devout men buried Stephen and made loud lamentation over him. But Saul was ravaging the church by entering house after house. Dragging off both men and women, he committed them to prison. Now those who were scattered went from place to place proclaiming the word. Philip went down to the city of Samaria and proclaimed the Messiah to them. The crowds with one accord listened eagerly to what was said by Philip, hearing and seeing the signs that he did. For unclean spirits, crying with loud shrieks, came out of many who were possessed, and many others who were paralyzed or lame were cured. So there was great joy in that city.
Well, I would argue that the early church was a kind of a rogue church. From that point in Acts 8, for the next 300 years, the church was under persecution. And it was actually illegal for them to even gather. And what do you do with that? If you're persecuted. And, you know, countries have gone through that in modern day. They've had, the church has been declared illegal in other places. And you would think that maybe people would say, well, maybe we should close our doors till it's a little safer. And I think some churches have done that over the years. Maybe till it's legal. But no, the early church didn't do that. No, instead, as Chris read, they continued to go around the country preaching the gospel, which literally means the good news. The good news they're preaching while they're persecuted, while they're made illegal. And the good news is that God loves everyone. And that gave them great joy. So this church that's completely in persecution for 300 years. Have you guys ever waited for something for 300 years? Like it feels like it probably sometimes, you know when you're in a difficult spot and it just feels like you've been there so long. 300 years. and it said that they had joy. That's rogue. Very rogue. In the midst of that kind of hardship, to have joy. And I have an opinion that's unsubstantiated by anyone else, that was the best time of the church. That 300 years of persecution, everybody knew the cause. Everybody was so serious about their faith because it could cost them their life. And as soon as the church becomes the official religion in the year 325, they start doing exactly what the society around them was doing. They oppress people. They have power moves. The high priests, and eventually the popes start killing each other for power. Until one day there's like 3 popes at the same time, all in different areas, that think that they're the one. I mean, the church, when it got its freedom, it just did what everybody else did. So my opinion would be that the early church, the church under persecution, probably resembled the best of the ideas of Jesus. So they met in these homes, and they broke bread together. They prayed. They had secret symbols like the fish, so they could keep safe from the government. And they continued to spread the word, and that must have been really difficult, because you're not quite sure who to trust. So, interesting. Well, is Countryside a rogue church? Do you guys feel rogue? So when I was looking at the church for the first time, I looked it up online, and I read the description of the church, and I thought, oh, that's cool. And then I saw the Tri-Faith, a church that was considering partnering with a synagogue and a mosque. And just the idea that the church would even consider it blew me away. And the church I came from, it wouldn't have even hit the desk of anybody. It wouldn't have even entered the door. The invitation would have been like, and then just fallen on the ground and thrown away. But this church actually considered it, took it seriously. And for a Christian church who, most Christian churches are fairly exclusive, to enter into that kind of relationship and then to vote to do it, I was just like, it was a rogue church. And, I mean, there's so much more, our stance on open and affirming and inclusive, welcoming all. I mean, that right there is what makes the church rogue. So, do you feel it? Feel the rogue?
Please stand and join us. I love
Please be seated. From the Gospel of Matthew. But Jesus called to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. It will not be so among you. But whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as ransom for many." And from Matthew 5, "You have heard it said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For God makes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous."
Well, you knew this was coming, rogue Jesus, right? What do you think? Does this look like Jesus? What do you think, Valentine? Does that look like Jesus up there? No? Oh. Do you think that looks like Jesus? Yeah? Is that what you're used to? What do you guys think? Is this what Jesus looked like? Or is this what Jesus looked like? This is actually a Discovery Channel compilation of what they figure people looked like back then and what people looked like in that area. So it's Discovery Channel, though, so, they can do whatever they want. What do you guys think? Yeah? But it's not as familiar, when you picture Jesus taking the children into his arms, knocking on doors. But it's possible that this is what Jesus really looked like. Well, then this person put out that Jesus was Swedish. I don't know how Scandinavia got to think so highly of itself, but... And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that picture is the author of the article. But oh no, they think that's what Jesus looked like. Oh, brother. Now, Jesus came with a very rogue message, for sure. As Chris read, the Gentiles were lording it over them. Those who were in power were tyrants to the rest of the people. That's how the system worked back then. And Jesus just says, no, that's not going to be how you do it. That's not going to be how my disciples do it. You're going to treat people fairly. You're going to treat people equity. You're going to welcome the aliens. You're going to welcome the poor and the orphans and the widows. You're going to take care of all these people. And he says that the greatest of you will be the one that's the servant. It's like a total upside down society. I think that's what Jesus really wanted to see. A totally different society where we take care of each other. We're not so interested in gaining power, but we're looking out for each other. Look not only to your own interests, but for the best of other people. Well, there was another guy about 600 years later named Muhammad. The only reason I know that is because I just took a class in seminary on Muhammad. It was on the writings of Muhammad, and I learned so much because I knew nothing. And Muhammad was born into a society called Mecca in the 600s, early 600s. And Mecca was an interesting society in that it was completely dominated by merchants. So it was kind of this wandering society, and those who were in power were the ones with the most stuff. So the merchants wound up being very powerful, and they just ignored the poor. I mean, there was just not even considering their needs. There wasn't a lot of charity going on. And so Muhammad grew up in this culture, actually with his uncle, and he learned to be a very trustworthy person and very honest. He was known for those things. And in fact, somebody asked him to take their convoy of goods and sell them out in the country, and he came back with like a greater return than they even expected. And so Muhammad had this really good reputation of negotiating, of being fair, of being trustworthy, and of being honest. And he goes up into this mountain to meditate on a day called the Mountain of Light, and he goes in this cave, and it's there where he receives the revelation from the angel Gabriel to write the Quran. And it was known that Muhammad was illiterate at that point, so writing the Quran was a pretty big deal. So this is the kind of traditional story, and Karen Armstrong wrote this book about Muhammad, very good, but it's the traditional story. And so the Quran contained, the words that were spoken to him to speak to other people, and they were all the same messages, just like Jesus had given. Love your neighbor, treat people equitably, watch out for the poor, the widow, the orphan. Muhammad actually had a lot of wives. You know why? Because he was trying to care for them. Because widows didn't have any rights or any money. So to marry somebody elevated their status, whether you believe that or not. But the Quran has the same message, a kind of upside down social system. And so what happened was it just transformed that whole area of Arabia, starting with Mecca. And there were wars, and I could tell you the whole story. But what happened was, because of Muhammad's determination to get his message out, people flocked to Islam. People became Muslim, and it transformed the whole culture. It was no longer controlled by this merchant. Now, maybe today, some of that stuff has seeped back in, as it always does. But that was the goal. Maybe he's a rogue Muhammad, trying to change the system because of God's words. So both Jesus and Muhammad have these roles of trying to create a new system. And to me, that's the rogue part of it. And the most rogue to me is when Jesus talks about love. He says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a system of revenge, retribution, punishment fits the crime. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I mean, it's just upside down. How can love do that much? How can love have that kind of power? Gandhi said, if you do an eye for an eye, it only ends up making the whole world blind. And then there's the message in the same passage, turn the other cheek. If somebody hits you in the face, turn the other cheek. What kind of message is that? It's a message of love. It's a message of love for each other. Love for the whole world. Maybe love is that powerful that it can totally turn the world on its end.